Hello, geeks, freaks, and all those unique. This is MC Frodis, and I think I've made it pretty clear that I'm a massive fan of the relationship between Spock and Uhura. They are arguably what got me into the Star Trek fandom as more than just a casual watcher. And while my interest has expanded, I do always come back to how much I love them as a couple. Spock and Uhura are a couple within all three Kelvinverse movies. Yes, all three. They were going through a rough patch and beyond, but they're clearly back together by the end of it. And while it's always contained to just a few fleeting scenes, it's still a cornerstone of the continuity. It's also given much more attention in the Beta Canon, where you can have stories which focus more on character interactions and don't need to have an action scene every 10 minutes lest the audience get bored. Because of my love of this couple and the Kelvinverse Beta Canon, I wanted to do a top 10 list of my favorite Spuhura moments within these comics and books. There will be spoilers for all of the stories, so if you want to check them out first, please do. Number 10, Spock and Uhura's Unfolding Romance, Starfleet Academy Novels. The Starfleet Academy novels are one of the more curious entries in all of the Star Trek Beta Canon. While it's often joked that Beta Canon is just professional fanfiction, the Starfleet Academy novels take this to some pretty intense levels, as it hits almost note for note the stereotypical Spuhura slow burn academy fic. Over the course of the 4 novels, we see Spock and Uhura's friendship blossom, then working together first on academic endeavors, then the stakes are raised by investigating dangerous situations. While all of this is happening, their emotional ties to each other are deepening, which ends up in them consummating their relationship. What puts these books at the bottom of the list is, while they're decent, these stories are probably the easiest to ignore. Everything that happens in them are shown differently in other stories, and I like most of those better. It's also such a paint-by-numbers fanfic premise that I can name 24 fics that did them better, because those fics weren't constrained by things like insistence that Spock and Kirk don't meet until the movie, making the plot twist into a pretzel to avoid that particular meeting. This is also the only version of the continuity where Spock is portrayed as a full teacher at the Academy, making the relationship between him and Uhura pretty questionable, something which is handled much better elsewhere. Still, if you ignore that, there are some fantastic ship moments between these two as each book progresses their relationship further. By the last book, we are given wonderful bits like, Uhura stepped closer, and Spock fought back the human, emotional part of him that yearned for her, and the physical part of both halves of him that desired her. Cadet Uhura, do you have a visual? Spock said. After the night they had spent together, it was difficult not to use her first name when speaking to her, but decorum was required. Both of these are from the Assassination Game. Nothing that happens in the novels are strong enough to stand on their own as moments, but all of them together... It's nice to have an officially published version of how they got together, even if I think fanfic has done it better. Number 9, Spock doesn't want the ISS Enterprise, he just wants Uhura. Star Trek Ongoing 15. I'm not what one would consider the biggest fan of the Mirror Universe. I think the episode Mirror Mirror is really good, but I think the law of diminishing returns is in full effect when it comes to this dark reality. There's only so many ways you can do what if this character, but evil. But I'm not surprised that they would want to look at how the Mirror Universe is different in the Kelvin timeline, because it's such a mainstay. I was very nervous about it, though, as Uhura in the Kelvinverse is much more sexualized, and add the Mirror Universe on top of that. I was very pleasantly surprised that instead of going full First Officer's Woman route, Mirror Uhura is portrayed as more of a Lady Macbeth character, whispering in Spock's ear about how he should take the ship from Kirk. Spock admits that he doesn't have any ambition to be the captain, and the only thing he wants is Uhura herself. It's a nice bit of humanization of the Mirror counterparts that we don't often get to see. I didn't really have a place to put this on my list, but one of the beautiful things about the interdimensional shenanigans of the Mirror Universe plot and the later Idic plot is that Spock and Uhura are portrayed as a constant throughout. There are only 2 things that happen within every parallel of this timeline. George Kirk dies, and Spock and Uhura are together. It really drives home just how important this couple is to this particular timeline. Number 8. Uhura gropes Spock with her foot / Vulcan sugar. The Unsettling Stars. I put these two together because they're two very small scenes and they're from the same book. Outside of the novelizations and the young adult Starfleet Academy books, the Kelvin timeline was largely ignored by book publishers. Several books were commissioned, but long put on hold. One of them ended up being rewritten into the Prime timeline, while the other two would see publication in 2020. The first of these books was by sci-fi novel legend Alan Dean Foster, entitled The Unsettling Stars. The story features the Enterprise helping a group of fast-learning alien refugees, which gets them into trouble. One of the things I find absolutely wonderful in the Beta Canon of the Kelvinverse is how they're not at all shy about letting us know how absolutely horny Spock and Uhura are for each other. While they of course go on missions together and are oftentimes totally professional, there are other times when you realize you're reading Alan Dean Foster having Uhura give Spock a foot job. Unsettling Stars only has a few Spock and Uhura moments, but the few that are there are... The first major one, which I already mentioned, is Spock and Uhura having dinner together in the mess hall when they're talking about the aliens. But naughty Uhura's foot gets a little restless and starts to proceed up Spock's leg. Spock, needing to meet with the aliens, jumps up quickly to, well, avoid getting a boner, but he admits he would much rather follow her attempted podal misdirections to its logical conclusion. Why, Spock, that mouth on you. The second scene takes place near the end of the book, where a majority of the crew has been drugged in a way that is very similar to the Naked Time, losing inhibitions, but in this case, becoming very lethargic too. Spock is unaffected, but poor Uhura very much is, and we're given the gift of a quote, "Spocky, honey, where have you been? Slip us a little of that Vulcan sugar, won't you?" Legit, how can you dislike something with the line, "Slip us a little of that Vulcan sugar"? Number 7. Uhura worries about Spock's death wish. Star Trek Ongoing, number 6. Going from one of the most ridiculous entries on this list to one of the more serious ones is one of the plots running through the first storyline of the Star Trek Ongoing comics. These comics are some of the best writing in all of Star Trek's Beta Canon. Serving to fill the gaps between the Kelvinverse movies, these comics show how we get from Star Trek 09 to Into Darkness, with many of the storylines remaking classic episodes. But we also see Kirk struggling with being the captain so quickly after leaving the Academy, and the fallout from the destruction of Vulcan. The destruction of Vulcan is such a major development that it had to echo throughout the timeline. We see that reflected in Spock as he suffers from survivor's guilt, manifesting in him taking more and more dangerous risks as he subconsciously believes he does not deserve to live when so many of his kind have died. This affects his relationship with Uhura, who is constantly concerned with his well-being. This is a beautiful explanation to what people describe as Uhura's nagging of Spock in Into Darkness. I always thought she was pretty justified in how she felt about Spock risking himself needlessly, but this storyline drives home that this is repeated behavior due to his unexpressed grief. And I think that showing a couple dealing with hard times can demonstrate their love even more than when they're happily in love, because Spock and Uhura never stop being in love. It's just that they have a lot of difficult issues to deal with. Number 6. Spock risks his career for Uhura. Star Trek Academy number 6. As if Star Trek weren't confusing enough, the Kelvin tie-ins give us 2 series called Starfleet Academy. This one, a 6-part comic miniseries, focuses on 2 storylines. One shortly after the end of Star Trek 09 with original cadet characters, and one set the year previous focusing on Uhura. Of the 2 Starfleet Academy series, this is the superior one. They handle keeping Kirk and Spock in the story, but not meeting more deftly, so you don't even really notice it. They also have a really strong Spock and Uhura story. While we don't see them get together, rather we're focusing on a rough patch earlier in their courtship, Uhura does give a summation of their relationship, which is highly preferable to the one from the novels. Spock was a graduate student teacher's assistant when he and Uhura became involved. They also didn't become a couple until after Uhura was finished with anything Spock could have influenced. While this is still not ideal, this is preferable and actually more realistic to what the novels portrayed. I think people forget just how young Spock is supposed to be. He's only 3 years older than Uhura, hardly old enough to be her professor. But Spock still worries about propriety, something that gets in the way of their relationship. but their feelings for one another can't be denied. Spock cares so much about Uhura that he's willing to risk his career, even if it's in the most logical, well-thought-out way possible. While the story focuses on Uhura, Spock is in the background of the entire story, and we see just how much he pines for her, because he knows he's made a big mistake breaking up with her. By the end, he doesn't say the words, but Spock makes it very clear that all of his actions are because he loves Uhura and wants to be with her. Their relationship doesn't just start again, but becomes even deeper with having its status quo shaken. And when it comes to adopting a headcanon, these comics are where I turn to for early days of Spock and Uhura's relationship. Number 5. Spock defends Uhura from T'Pring, more beautiful than death. One of the biggest questions fans had with Spock and Uhura being in a relationship is what that meant for Spock's betrothal to T'Pring. I don't think Spock would have gotten into a serious relationship while he had essentially a wife waiting for him in the wings. This is one of the things that made the Star Trek After Darkness Pon farr storyline so absolutely offensive. I won't go too deeply into that because this is a list about the stuff I liked in Beta Canon, but as much as I loved the ongoing series redoing episodes, Amok Time is really one that shouldn't have been touched because of the changes in the situation. Luckily, the Beta Canon will often cover similar topics multiple times, and this novel handles T'Pring in a completely different way than the comics. It would have been very easy for them to say T'Pring died on Vulcan. That's uninteresting. What's more interesting is that Spock and T'Pring broke off their engagement specifically because they both desired to pursue other relationships, but the destruction of Vulcan made that much more complicated. In this book by David Mack, T'Pring is portrayed as a villainous character, but one that we can understand the reasoning of. We see in flashback that when Vulcan was destroyed, she was in the middle of being bonded to Ston, but he was killed. And in her blinding grief, she's decided to perform Faltor Pan to have Ston's Katra placed inside Spock. This book shows how much Spock values his relationship with Uhura, as he argues with Sarek about his right to pursue his own path, especially given Sarek's own marriage to a human. But at the same time, Spock gets a bit of Vulcan version of embarrassed that he has unintentionally revealed his desire to marry Uhura. But probably the biggest moment is when T'Pring uses the same insult against Uhura that Spock heard about his mother while growing up, and he has the same reaction to it. These are the two most important women in his life, and he's not going to stand by while someone calls them human whore. He has an even stronger reaction to that than the knowledge that T'Pring is literally trying to kill him. That says so much to me about Spock. Number 4, Spock and Uhura Mind Meld, Star Trek Ongoing 18. The mind meld is one of the most famous aspects of Vulcan culture. While it's usually used as a plot device to retrieve exposition, most fans have figured there was some sort of relationship-deepening, pseudo-sexual version of it. This comic not only shows us that yes, there is, but it gives us a peek into Kelvinverse Uhura's history. We start out by seeing exactly how Spock and Uhura's relationship started, with Uhura being super ballsy and asking Spock out. We then see the early parts of their courtship, where Spock decides to deepen the relationship with Uhura by engaging in Emcee Kitto, a special type of mind meld for couples, which, if I'm to understand correctly, is like the telepathic version of second base. During this meld, Uhura shares the memory of her uncle sacrificing himself to save her and her parents in a shuttle accident, which she'd never shared with anyone outside of her family. Spock feels closer to her once they share this meld, and while all we see is them kissing, they 100% banged next. This story is particularly important because it was the only backstory we had for Uhura in either timeline prior to Strange New Worlds episode Children of the Comet. Strange how both of them involved Uhura's family members being killed in transport accidents. But it really highlights the best part of having Spock and Uhura in a relationship, and that's getting to know them better outside of the bridge. Also, they totally banged. Mind melds are a hell of an aphrodisiac. Number 3. Uhura saves Spock in the Galileo 7 incident. Star Trek Ongoing number 4. When Star Trek Ongoing started, one of the first things they decided to do was remake a number of classic Star Trek episodes. This allowed them to put a modern twist on old stories. One of the stories they chose to remake was the Galileo 7, which happens to be one of my favorite episodes. This storyline ties to the death wish Spock has in the time between 2009 and Into Darkness. Spock is prepared to sacrifice himself in order to save the rest of the landing party. However, he ends up not having to do that because Uhura goes against orders, commandeers another shuttle, and retrieves the stranded crew. This is a scenario that has come up in other Star Trek shows when two characters are involved in a relationship. One of the most prominent examples is the Deep Space Nine episode Change of Heart, having to make a choice to go against orders to save the person you love. But the difference in this to Deep Space Nine is that Kirk is the captain, and he's the type of captain that's going to break the rules to save as many crew members as he can. To put the icing on the cake, Kirk shows himself to be a shipper on deck for Spuhura, as he punishes them by confining them to shared quarters. And I just love that. Kirk as a supporter of their relationship is something I've always loved, and it's one of my favorite parts of Into Darkness. After Kirk's want to pursue Uhura in 2009, it's nice that he just gracefully bows out to allow these two to be in love. Number 2. Sarek wants grandbabies. Star Trek Boldly Go, number 9. Following Beyond, the status quo of the Kelvinverse was changed yet again, and the comic books reflected that by changing their series to Boldly Go. This series is, I think, some of the best Kelvin tie-in stories, with some very tight writing and really delving in deep with the characters. With the Enterprise destroyed and beyond, and time needed for Enterprise A to be built, Boldly Go starts with Spock and Uhura taking a sabbatical from Starfleet. Having reunited at the end of the movie, they choose to spend time on New Vulcan, helping out the colony, and reaffirming their connection to one another, and this includes Uhura getting to know Sarek. Most fans assumed that Sarek would not be thrilled with Spock's relationship with Uhura, and this mindset is reflected in other stories, such as More Beautiful Than Death. But here we get to see a different idea. This is a Sarek who has gone through the deepest of tragedies and has come to terms with his emotions. He's comfortable with Spock's choices, especially because Uhura, damn good choice. And Sarek is smart enough to know that. Not only does he think it's a smart idea that they're in a relationship, but he wants to nudge Spock into a more permanent situation. Throughout the issue, he's hinting that Spock and Uhura should get married, and other Vulcans talk about the idea of Spock and Uhura marrying and having kids. It leads to Spock and Uhura having a very nice conversation about marriage, which leads to them getting kind of pre-engaged. No proposals are made, but it's made very clear by both of them that it's what they want in the future. It's honestly the logical progression of their relationship, seeing that by that point they've been together for like 5 years. And it's just really nice to see the softer side of Sarek. Number 1, Interdimensional Bed Swap. Star Trek Ongoing, number 59. To celebrate the 50th anniversary of Star Trek, the ongoing series ended its original run with a special crossover event, tying the original series crew to the Kelvinverse. Due to some negative space wedgie, crew members end up randomly switching with their counterpart in the other timeline. This starts with Kirk, but eventually all of the members of the crew switch at pretty inopportune times. This leads to one of the most hilarious scenes in all of Star Trek comics, where the original timeline Spock goes to his quarters to lie down, but they're actually Kelvinverse Spock's quarters, and Uhura walks in, takes off her clothes, and tells him he doesn't have to call her Lieutenant when they're alone. To make matters worse, or better, Kelvinverse Spock wakes up in bed with Prime Uhura, who's not at all happy about surprise naked Spock. Cannot relate to that. This is number 1 on my list because it's not only Kelvinverse, but does delve a bit into Prime, and I do ship these two in all of their forms. The scene is capped off at the end with Uhura questioning Spock if the other Uhura had any interest in him, to which Spock said she didn't, but Uhura seems unconvinced of this fact. Yeah, none of us believe that either. The relationship between Spock and Uhura is so important to the Kelvinverse. More than anything else, it changes the dynamic in the characters from what we see in the Prime timeline. Because of this, it's really important to show them off in the tie-in media. The Kelvin tie-ins were really solid stories, especially the comics, and I'm really sorry they discontinued them. I'm hoping, with the plans to move forward with Kelvin 4, that maybe we'll get more Beta Canon for this timeline, and include more interactions with this couple. And can we please let them get married already? Sarek deserves his grandkids. So comment down below with your favorite Spuhura moments in Beta Canon. What are your favorite moments with them in the movies? What moments would you like to see from them in the future? If you like my videos, subscribe to my channel. I do videos about Star Trek, Star Wars, and lots of other geeky things. If you want to support me, please visit my Patreon. You can also buy me a coffee, or you can go to my Redbubble and TeePublic and buy my geeky graphic designs. So until next time, live long, and may the Force be with you.